Welcome to this video where I will explain the structure in Strategirummets climate scenario model. When defining the structure of the climate model, we must formulate key figures which determine the energy system and which ensures that the energy system is always in balance. Users, they must be able to change each key figure without having to focus on whether the energy system is still in balance. And users must be able to find historical values of these key parameters so they get to know the historical development of these key parameters. Here you can see a picture of the whole energy system. It starts here where fuels are entering the energy system. We have different kinds of fuels: coal, crude oil, natural gas, uranium, biomass. And here the fuels, they are transported, and here the fuels, they are converted to secondary energy in forms of electricity, district heating, and oil products. And here the secondary energy is transported, and here we have the final energy use. When defining the key parameters that will define the whole energy system here, we start at the end use. We start here with defining the total final consumption with an absolute value. Then we define the percentage distribution between the end use in different sectors here. And then after that, we define the percentage distribution between the different energy forms in each sector. Here we have an Excel sheet where we have the total final consumption here, and then we have the distribution between the different sectors here, and here we have the distribution of the different energy forms within each sector. In the climate scenario model, the sector here, other, is divided between residential, commercial, and public service, and agriculture and forestry, fishing, and not specified. This is how it looks in the climate scenario model. Here you have the total final consumptions. Here you have the distribution between the different sectors. And here you have the energy forms distribution within each sector. What you can see here is the historical values here. And here is the values that you have to put in for the future, year 2013, year 2050. Now we know the total final consumption and how it is distributed between the different sectors. And now we are going to find out the losses in the transportation of electricity, district heating, and oil products. In the Excel sheet, you insert key figures for electricity losses in percentage of final consumption and the losses of heat in relation to final consumption. Now we know the final consumption and the transport losses of electricity and district heating, but still we don't know how much electricity and district heating that should be produced, because there's also an own consumption of electricity and heat and oil products in the conversion sector. So we have to define this own consumption. In this picture of the energy system, it is this part here, the own use in the energy and industry, we have to define. We assume here that the total consumption here is proportional with the total final consumption. So now we have to define a key figure that says how much this percentage should be. When we have defined the percentage, then we also have to define the distribution between the different energy forms we use here as own use in the energy industry. Here in the Excel sheet, You should insert here as a key figure the percentage of the total consumption that is own use in the energy industry. And after that, you should define the distribution between the different energy forms here. We're now looking at district heating. We know the total district heating end use here, the losses in the distribution system, and we also know the district heating consumption here in energy industry. So now we have to define how this district heating is produced, how much is produced on combined heat and power plants, and how much is produced on heat-only plants. In the Excel sheet, we set key figures for the percentage of production on CHP plants and heat-only plants. We will now define a key parameter that shows us how much of the district heating that is produced based on electricity. Here in the Excel sheet, we set a figure of how many percentage of the total heat production that is based on electricity. We now have all key parameters that defines the total electricity consumption. We must now define key parameters that determine the distribution of production between the plants that produce electricity. We know the heat production on the combined heat and power plants, and now we defined a new key parameter that is the CM value. The CM value is the relation between electricity production and heat production. If we know this key value, then we also know how much electricity that is produced on the combined heat and power plants. In the Excel sheet, we define the CM value for the CHP plants. We know the total electricity consumption. We also know how much electricity is produced on CHP plants. And then we, of course, also know the electricity production on the electricity-only plants. We therefore now have the key parameters that determines electricity and district heating production at each of the different types of production technologies. We now have key parameters that defines the production here on this side here, and we have to select key parameters that will define the total consumption here and the distribution between the different energy forms that is consumed in each of these technologies. We start here with the electricity-only plants, and now we have to select key parameters that defines how much of the total electricity production on these plants that are based on solar, wind, and hydro. As a key parameter, we have here production on solar, wind, and hydropower. In the Excel sheet here, we define how much of the total production on these electricity-only plants will come from hydro, how much will come from solar, geothermal, and wind, and how much will be based on fuels. When we know the production on wind, solar, and hydro, we can subtract this production from the total production. And then as a result here, we will see how much should be produced on fuel-based plants. In the Excel sheet here, we also fill out the distribution between geothermal, solar, wind, and fuel-based plants on the CHP plants and on the heat-only plants. The CHP plants and the heat-only plants, they will not be based on hydro, so we only need to fill out the distribution between geothermal, solar, wind, and fuel-based for these two technologies. Now we know the electricity production on the electricity only plants based on fuels, and now we have to find out how much fuel they are using. In order to do that, we have to have a key figure for the efficiency of these plants here. For each plant technology, we defined the efficiency of the plant. When we know the efficiency and we know the production of each of these technologies, we can calculate the total energy use in these different types of production plants. In the Excel sheet here, you can see that you have to fill in the efficiency of the different types of technologies. We know the total fuel consumption on the electricity only plants, and now we have to find the distribution between the different kinds of fuels. In the Excel sheet, it looks like this here. We have the electricity only plants, and we have to put the distribution between the different fuels used here on the electricity only plants and the distribution between the fuels used here on the CSP plants and the heat only plants and the oil refineries. We are now here at a stage where we know the final consumption of fuels, and we also know the fuels consumed in the conversion sector. So now we have to also know the losses in the transportation of fuels. We shall then set the key parameters that defines the losses of transporting fuels. When we are going to define the key parameters for the transport of fuels here, we do not need to define these parameters because the energy used here in order to transport fuels is part of the energy consumption here in the transport sector. The input of fuels to the energy system is equal to the consumption of fuels. And now we have in fact defined the energy balance for the whole system. So we have here all the key parameters that will define the system. So it starts up here where we define the total end use, and then we have a lot of parameters that will define the losses here and how the production of electricity, heat, and oil products is between the different technologies here and how much input there is here. And so we have, in fact, all the key parameters that will define the energy balance of the system. Here is an overview of all the key parameters in the Excel sheet. We have key parameters here for the final energy use, and we have key parameters for the conversion sector here. So in the climate scenario model, you have to fill in all these cells in the Excel sheet. Before you start using the climate scenario model, I will recommend you to see the tutorial for this scenario model.